today's show, we continue our NFL Draft Preview Bonanza. I'm Mark Simon, your resident question asker, along with SIS VP of Football and R&D, Matt Manocherian. Today, we're joined by a large cast. We've got some of our top video scouts and player evaluators, Nathan Cooper and John Todd, whom you've heard from before. Also, Jordan Edwards and Jeff Dean, who have watched some of the top players in this year's draft. They were also heavily involved in our company's mock draft. And then we'll be joined by Corey March to discuss a few of the NFL draft props. Thank you for joining us. We're inching closer to Thursday night. We've done a bunch of episodes in a row where Matt has basically held up signs to say to the 49ers, Justin Fields is the fit for you. But Kyle Shanahan doesn't seem to be listening. Sounds like it's between Mac Jones and Trey Lance. Let's get a new voice in to start the show. Jeff Dean, you watched a lot of Mac Jones this year. You co-wrote his scouting report in the Football Rookie Handbook. Give us your take on the good and the bad with Mac Jones.
Yeah, I mean, the one big thing that stands out about Mac Jones is his leadership ability. You know, he was able to lead a high-powered offense at Alabama. You know, he had great weapons all around him, but he was able to fully maximize their potential. He was the one able to get the ball in tight windows when he needed to. He has really good deep ball touch. You know, he doesn't have the arm strength to throw the ball on an out route and, you know, hit the receivers across the field. But when he puts his touch on the ball, short routes, mid routes, and deep routes, he's able to put the ball exactly where he wants. His footwork in the pocket can be a little sloppy at times, especially under pressure, but his pocket awareness is real good. He's able to feel the pressure coming around him and able to get rid of the ball. He rarely puts the ball in harm's way. And, you know, I think the biggest drawback to him is that his lack of potential. He's physically not as talented as some of the other players, which is probably why Trey Lance is in consideration as well. But I think, you know, the number one thing is he's going to be able to come in day one and you're going to know exactly what type of quarterback you're going to get.
He seems to be a player who's got a stock up attached to his name. And let's talk about the other player that we mentioned, the quarterback, Trey Lance. Let's contrast that with Nathan. I believe we talked about this when the book came out. Our take on Trey is that he's a bit of a project. How so?
Yeah, I think he's possibly the highest upside of anyone in this quarterback class, but he's one of those guys that's a high ceiling, low floor guy. You have some questions, the inexperience at the quarterback position. He only played 17 games, and that's actually at an FCS school. So that's a little bit of a worry there. Also, completion percentage, on target rate, they were good, but they weren't great. Something that he can definitely improve on. But whenever you look at him at total body here, the athleticism is there. He works the pocket, he extends plays, has a strong arm, makes all the throws. He runs well. Whenever you're looking at the numbers, excluding sacks, he ran for over 1,100 yards last year, 14 touchdowns in 2019. You know, very good athlete, built like a running back, able to improvise, can create yardage on his own on scrambles, and, you know, can also run those design veers and powers as well. Intriguing guy, a little frustrating to watch here and there, but I think his upside is, why a lot of people are considering him in the top 5.
Yeah, both of those guys, Jeff and Nate, that you talk about, whether it be Trey Lance or Mac Jones, they're a little bit behind our top 3 quarterbacks in the Football Rookie Handbook. And when I looked over at the mock draft, no surprise, Trevor Lawrence, number 1 off the board in the SIS mock draft, Zach Wilson, number 2. But the pivot in this draft is obviously that number 3 pick. Trey Lance went off the board, taken by our fantastic producer, Justin, I should mention, by the way. But with Trey Lance going at number 3 there, Jones dropped down to number 15 to the Patriots in that mock. And I think that that's something that could really happen. You know, everybody's been thinking Mac Jones at number 3, and that could very much be the case. But if that's not, if Kyle Shanahan doesn't take Jones at number 3, then I could really see there being a slip. And it could go even further than that number 15 pick for Mac Jones. And I think that's a reflection on, you know, just going back to the grades and outside of if one guy falls in love with a prospect, then, you know, anybody can go anywhere in the draft. But in terms of the way things are graded, there was a reason why there was a gap between the top 3 quarterbacks and Lance and Jones. Totally different reasons, but similar situations.
If Dak's status for 2021 was more of a question, would you still say that about a slide all the way down to 15?
Yeah, I mean, to me, when I'm looking at that, I'm looking at the evaluation of the player. I think that there's been a lot of people talking themselves into Mac Jones. And certainly you look at the statistics last year and all of the production in the world. I'm not going to doubt that at all. There are things that you like about his game when it comes to the accuracy, the decision-making, but I think he's maxed out. I think that, you know, if you looked at him as an NBA draft pick, this isn't somebody that you'd be considering as a lottery pick. That, you know, he's got some kind of more average qualities to his game. So Yeah, that would add another team that would have a need at quarterback if you created that hypothetical. But still, I think we're probably talking ourselves into overdrafting Mac Jones when we talk about as high as he's likely to go in this draft.
All it takes is one coach to fall in love with you, and there you wind up.
And all it takes is a good coach that you get into the right system with, and then all of a sudden I'm eating my words. So.
All right, so we go from pass throwers to pass catchers. We want to get a fresh take on the receiver class. We've got the people here who wrote our reports on Jalen Waddle, Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, and Kyle Pitts. So, Matt, where do we have these guys going in the mock?
So we have at number 4, Kyle Pitts coming off the board to the Falcons. Then at number 6, Jamar Chase coming to the Dolphins. Jalen Waddle following the very next pick to the Lions. And then at number 11, Devonta Smith with the steal potentially for the Giants there.
And let's start with Jordan, and let's start with Devonta Smith, because you're someone that looked at him closely this past season. What's your take on him?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing when you talk about Devonta Smith is his route running. He's smooth, he's savvy, he understands how to play off cornerbacks and play off coverages. I think another big thing about him is his hands. He rarely drops passes. He's got a wide catch radius. He's made some spectacular catches in his career at Alabama, really over 4 years. He made a spectacular championship game catch in his freshman season against Georgia. He's not a twitchy athlete. He's not like some of these guys, like his counterparts, whether it be Jalen Waddle or Jerry Jeudy or Henry Ruggs over the last couple of years. But he's smooth. He's quick. He's got some speed to him. He's obviously been clutches to his entire career. I think obviously the size concerns are, something to note, but I think it hasn't really hindered his ability to produce at a high level for a championship team. And so I don't think that it's necessarily something that is going to hinder his ability at the next level. He's going to be able to produce no matter what.
It's funny how the stock rises with someone with like Mac Jones. Devonta Smith, maybe not going as high as some people might think. John, you looked at 2 of these players very closely. You wrote their reports for the Football Rookie Handbook. Let's start with Kyle Pitts, since we have him going 4. What was your take on him this year? Why is he going to be so good?
Special player. Mismatch ability is the first thing that comes to mind with him. I graded him as almost an X receiver. I considered that for sure. But at 6'5", 240 pounds, he's going to have that ability to be a mismatch. Some forward-thinking offensive coordinator is going to be able to put him in advantageous situations to line up as a tight end, out wide in the slot, move him all over the place. Everybody's talking about all the good with him, and we have on this podcast as well. I'll mention a couple negatives just because, again, he's not without faults. Very slender limbs. That's kind of the first thing that points out to you is not a big strength guy. He falls off blocks a lot in the run game. He does compete in the run game, which is a great way for him to compensate, become a sufficient blocker and not a net negative in the run game. Somewhat of what Jordan said with Devonta Smith, and also something I'm going to talk about with Jamar Chase, is that he's not a sudden athlete as a route runner. He's not really breaking guys down as a route runner. He's got great straight line speed for his size for sure, but he's more of a smooth glider like Devonta is. And the special thing about him is going to be that catchability, separating at the catch point, making contesting catches in the red zone all over the place, making a nightmare for defensive coordinators to figure out if you go lighter personnel to cover him with defensive backs. Do you go heavier personnel to cover with a linebacker? He's got enough blocking ability to take advantage in the run game if you go lighter, vice versa in the passing game. So that's going to be the special thing about him. We have him going number 4. Arthur Smith's going to be able to put him in some advantageous situations and figure out how to get the ball in his hands.
And you have Chase going 6, which would mean he was going to the Dolphins. Just give us your perspective on him as a player.
Dominant hands catcher and dominant after the catch. Those are the 2 things that stand out to me about him. It seemed like every single time he caught a pass, it was with his hands away from his frame, even in traffic across the middle, not afraid to go over the middle. And almost every single time he caught a pass, he was breaking a tackle. He was slipping out of an arm tackle. He was finding a way to get extra unexpected yardage. Again, he's a guy who isn't without faults. He struggles off the line of scrimmage against physicality. He's not the quickest, shiftiest route runner to separate as a route runner all the time, but it's that ability at the catch point where he really separates himself, gets jump balls for a guy with fairly average size. And then obviously after the catch, he's really special. So I did have them graded as the 2 of them as a tight end and wide receiver, but I've had them all along in my head as being Pitts higher than Chase. It feels like it's going to work out that way, but certainly a fantastic player in his own right.
Not going to be higher by much, certainly. And Jalen Waddle, let's talk about him. Nathan, you were his guy this year. Just give us a summary of your write-up about him.
Yeah, we have Waddle going to the Lions. Obviously, a Lions team that has a rough roster in need of a lot of different positions, but need playmakers. And Waddle is definitely that kind of guy. Has all the traits you look for as a number one receiver. He has the speed, route running, savvy, tracking ability, and more. Not your typical speed receiver. We graded him a 9 speed, which is rare speed. But he's not your typical speed receiver who's only going to win on the screens or the verticals. But he knows how to run a full route tree. He can win on all of them, wins off the line, wins mid route, converts at the catch point. Very good in mixing up his speeds, in the middle of routes as well. Dynamic playmaker with the ball in his hands. And if you look at his limited 2020, caught 96% of his on-target passes, and he even has a 94% on-target pass catching rate for his career as well. So he definitely catches the balls. And before the ankle injury, was on his way to having just as good as or better a season as Devonta Smith. So definitely a big-time playmaker there, and would be a big help to a Lions offense.
All 4 of these guys are just so exciting in terms of what they bring. I almost hate that we have to put the rankings on each position, who's the number 1 wide receiver, number 2, number 3. These guys are all number 1 receivers in a typical draft. We've got high grades on all of them. Add Pitts into the equation. I just think teams are going to be really excited wherever they get these guys. And that's why we talk about not just the vertical stack of grades, but looking at things across the positions. And you see why these guys stand out in terms of their grades when you look at that. Pitts at number 4. I love that pick. He's a freak. John talks about mismatch ability. Another way to say that is freakishness. He's a freak. And that's why he transcends positional value when you talk about tight end versus wide receiver. Chase at number 6. I think that would be the Dolphins getting the same player that they would have taken at 3 if they hadn't made that trade earlier. So you got to love the Dolphins being able to pick up an extra first-round pick and then get Jamar Chase at number 6. That would be huge. Nate talked about Waddle to number 7 at the Lions. One thing that makes Waddle, I think, extra scary with his speed and his ability to change speeds is going on the indoor track, and teams that just how teams get scared when they have to cover Tyreek Hill. He's scary in that same way. And then, Devonta Smith to 11 at the Giants would be an absolute steal. And I mean, at that point, it's Daniel Jones. It's time. Like, they got the weapons in there at this point, all kinds of weapons on that team. He's really going to have to show something if they're able to pull in another weapon there. By that same token, I think it's Dave Gettleman got to go one way or another this year for the Giants.
You mentioned freaks before. Who are your NFL freaks?
Like Javon Curse style? I don't know, guys. Help me out. Who would you say are some freak? A guy who's a freak is one who just got traded, Orlando Brown. Just when you talk about an absolute mammoth, he's a guy who had a lot of questions for his athleticism coming out because he didn't test well. All he's done has been, I think, first and second in total points over the last 2 years. And he definitely brings some of that freakishness. Who are some of the other guys that come to mind for you guys?
Aaron Donald's a freak. Big-time playmaker. Not a big guy, but whenever you talk about him on the interior or the defensive line, he wreaks havoc, and that's the kind of freak that I want.
Trent Williams has always been my guy. Just the athleticism for a left tackle is extremely rare for a guy his size. Ability to get out in space, kind of like a Penei Sewell in this year's class, I think is bordering on that with his ability in space. But Trent Williams has been doing it for so long through injuries and everything, and still getting it done as an elite athletic tackle.
I'm going to take it a little different approach. My freak is Quentin Nelson. I mean, he's a massive human being that just is able to move anybody in front of him. I mean, from day one he stepped in the league, he was able to dominate grown men that are paid millions of dollars to try to get past him. He's been consistently just absolutely a pivot point on that offensive line for the Colts, and has really helped pave the way for whoever they put back there as their quarterback.
All right, so let's shift to the other side of the ball, and I want to touch on Patrick Surtain because Jordan did his write-up. We know he's going to be great, right? Is there any weakness in his game?
It's hard to find some. I think if you want to be nitpicky, you could probably say that he may be a little too big, but I think he's still a fluid athlete at his size at 6'2", 200 pounds. He looks like he was built in a cornerback laboratory, I think. And he's been coached by his dad for so long. He's one of the first freshmen at Alabama to be able to play and start right away. The only other guy that comes up when I think of that is Mika Fitzpatrick, and he's been great already in the NFL. I think the biggest thing with him is maybe he doesn't have that next level top-end speed, but he tested really well on his 40 times, so that maybe makes up for it. Certainly in-game, he doesn't necessarily have to do that because I think he plays with such a good tempo in his game, and he's so confident in coverage. I think that kind of just masks everything. He's got good ball skills. I think he can play either side of the field. it really, he can just take away a side of the field from any point in the game. So I think as a good fit, I think we have him to the Cowboys at number 10. I think it's a great fit. He can play with his former teammate Trevon Diggs on the other side from Alabama. So I really think at 10 he'd be a really good pick for them.
A game-changing type of player. Let's talk about a couple other players that are ranked highly on the defensive side. Jeff, you looked at the top wheel linebacker. Why did Owusu Koromoa stand out above everyone else?
Yeah, he's a new school type of linebacker. He's ridiculously fast in the open field, and he doesn't just play recklessly by flying, sideline to sideline and, missing tackles and stuff. He is decisive in his movements. He comes up and he will hit anybody just as hard in the passing game as the run game. He's extremely comfortable out in space. He would cover slot receivers out of college. His big knock, I guess some people would look at, is his size. He's a little undersized at maybe like 6'1", 215 range for a linebacker. So his ability to play in the box might be in question. But honestly, if you get a good defensive coordinator that can just move him in space and use him like a chess piece, I think he could play all over the field and is going to be a day one starter for whatever team is lucky enough to grab him.
John, we have Christian Barmore as the top defensive tackle. Why?
In a word, potential. He's still becoming a fully well-rounded player in the run game, but he's a guy who worked his way into the lineup late in his redshirt freshman year last year for Alabama, worked his way into their nickel and dime kind of heavy pass rushing down packages and got some production there. Everybody expected big things this past season, and he certainly delivered with the numbers, but he was still more of that pass rushing specialist. He wasn't a three-down stalwart until really towards the end of the season. So he's still very football young, especially in the run game sense, but he's a guy who's just built like a tank up top. He's barrel chested, really athletic. He's got intimidating closing speed for a guy his size. His ability to rush the passer in one-on-one situations with quickness, with energy, all of that stuff is going to translate right away to the NFL. That's going to be extremely coveted for a massive interior presence like that. But in order for him to become a really special player, he's going to have to round out that game, work on his run game discipline, run lane discipline, fight through blocks, work on the backside, be able to anchor on double teams when he needs to, and not just be that one gap penetrator, which is what he does best, but he can really round out his game, and there's a lot of potential to be tapped into there.
Built like a tank with speed. Sounds very appealing. All right, Nathan, you looked at a lot of the top two defenders at each position. Let's hit on one of them, Azizu Ogilari.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that you see whenever you watch him play is his hand use. He's very accurate with his hands. You're always able to knock away the hands and arms of tackles before they can get engaged. His first step is ridiculous. You're looking at explosion off the line and the length that he gets. He makes it really hard for tackles. Once they're getting off the ball, they're really having to contend with him right away. He gets into him really quickly. Ridiculous bend and pass rush ability off the edge. Big time speed rush guy. Does use the same move a little too often, especially the speed rush, but it's ridiculous. It works really well. And the biggest thing with him too, he's not only just a pass rusher. He can hold his own in the run game, hold the edge in the point of attack well. Second in adjusted tackle depth plus with 200, which is saying a lot for an edge rusher there. So definitely a player that can really set the edge. Big time pass rusher, does a lot of good things, and definitely a coveted player in the middle of the first round.
Yeah, when you look at the SIS mock draft, a couple of things definitely stand out. First of all, no surprise, but no defensive players until number 10. But then Christian Barmore, who John was just talking about, top defensive tackle coming off the board at number 12 after a little run of 3 Alabama players, Surtain, Devonta Smith, and Barmore. But then you get to number 18 before you have any edge players come off the board, and that is Azizu Ogilari, who Nate was just talking about. But all of a sudden, from that point, you get a sort of run on edges, which I think is something that we could see towards the end of the first round, maybe early in the second round. I think combined around there, we're going to see a lot of these sorts of guys come off the board after not seeing probably any in the first half of the first round. So we had that run with 6 total edges coming off between that number 18 and number 32 pick. So that could be something to watch out for on Thursday night.
All right, so let's close with this, as we've got some of our experts here. Who's your guy in the draft? Like someone who's not ranked top 4, top 5 at a position, but a guy that you like a lot. Give us one guy and give us 20 seconds or so to break it down.
Yeah, I think my guy is Darius Stills, defensive tackle out of West Virginia. He's really fun to watch, relentless, a very high motor player, explosive off the line, something you want to see on the interior line, heavy hands at the point of attack. I worry a little bit about balance issues and gap control with him, but I'm betting on his motor and the 2019 season he had, where he had 6 sacks, 12 and a half tackles for loss, and 38 pressures in 12 games. Really fun player to watch there.
My guy in this draft is going to be James Hudson. He's a guy that I know Jordan and I have talked about. We've had fun watching and talking about O-line swag for days. He's a former converted defensive lineman at Michigan, transferred over to Cincinnati and started 1 year at left tackle for Cincinnati. He's very football young, but the athleticism, the tenacity, the aggression, all that stuff that you see in a former defensive lineman. But on top of that, in that 1 year of playing left tackle, he showed some really high level technique with hand fighting techniques and the natural athleticism and stuff. So as he keeps bulking up and growing into that position, I think he's a guy with a really high ceiling.
I'm pretty excited about Rodarius Williams out of Oklahoma State. He's a cornerback, and he started 48 games in the Big 12. The one big knock on him is that he's a little old for his age. He was in college for 5 years, but he is a physical cornerback who's comfortable mixing up in press, man, zone. He fights off receivers at the line of scrimmage well. The biggest thing with him is he is intimidating. He wants to win. He's feeling like he's going to be the best guy out there, and I think he's got a potential in the NFL if he can just hone in a little bit on his run support.
Yeah, my guy is actually going to be Amari Rogers. I've watched a lot of Clemson games at my time here at SIS so far. Former Clemson wide receiver. He's got versatility, being able to play on the outside and in the slot. I think he's the type of guy who can stretch the field vertically. He can also take a little 3-yard screen pass and take it 70 yards to the house. He's coached well. His dad is actually a former Tennessee quarterback, and he's the wide receiver coach for the Baltimore Ravens, T. Martin. So I think this is just the type of guy that you want on your football team. He'll start for you in 11 personnel and 3 wide receiver sets. He's just an explosive play waiting to happen.
Hey, Matt, no one said a quarterback among these guys. What are your thoughts on some of the people who've designated their guy?
Yeah, you know what? I'm not surprised by that at all. I think this is a draft where there are the 5 quarterbacks that a lot of people know of. There's probably 3 other guys that I'd throw into a group kind of that have a chance, but there aren't really the guys that late in this year's draft where you think, oh, okay, that's the project type that I get really excited about. And I think that's the case at a lot of positions this year, actually, when you really look at it. And there's a good reason for that. And that is that there are just less players in this year's draft than there have been in a lot of drafts in the past. 2020, another crazy side effect of it is that a lot of these players are going to go back to school next year. So there's just less depth when you get deep into the later rounds. And when you talk about undrafted free agency, I think it's going to be slim pickings this year. So buyer beware. In terms of falling in love with players, I'd say after the first 100 picks, because there's just not that much to choose from.
You might also say buyer beware for falling in love with players a little higher than that, as we've discussed. All right, Nathan, John, Jeff, Jordan, thanks for joining us. Got a few more questions for Matt that we'll get to in a second. We've made significant changes to the SIS Data Hub Pro. You'll find so many more stats. Want to know who the top player is at each position in this year's draft class? Our college total points metric can guide you to the answer. Plus, we've added lots of filters to take advantage of what we do. Track every play of every game at the most granular level. We've got the data to get what you want to know. You can check it out. Sign up for a free trial at pro.sisdatahub.com. All right, thank you for joining us again today. We've been focused on players in the first part of the show. Before we go to Corey and draft props, I want to talk about a couple of teams with Matt. All right, Matt, so when I worked at ESPN, one of the people that I worked with was Buck Showalter. And every year he would give us a monologue. It was usually at the trade deadline. He would say, this is the time when every team has to decide who they are. The idea that it wouldn't overestimate the talent on its roster. So my question here is, what are the Dallas Cowboys? And that's working off the idea that Dak's going to be okay, right?
Yeah, so I think Dak's going to be okay, and that's the biggest thing that's going to change, I think, what they were last year to what they're going to be. If you look in the Football Rookie Handbook at the Cowboys team page, you see a team that was weak at a lot of different positions, including on the offensive side of the ball. But I think when you talk about the offensive line and the quarterback and the way that they're going to be hopefully much healthier at those 2 positions, which is really 6 positions going into this next year, I don't think that's where their problem is. Now, philosophically, it might be because they got to figure out who they are. This is a team that was supposedly going to be analytics forward, but they were 27th in the league with just a 21% play action rate last year. And they did some motion. They ranked 12th in motion, pre-snap motion percentage, but they were at negative 0.08 EPA per play, which was 26th in the league on those motion plays. So in terms of forming some sort of identity, yeah, it's going to help to get the personnel better, but they've got to figure out, if they're going to be trying to play this kind of forward-thinking style of football, they're going to have to kind of reconsider their strategy to do that more appropriately. Now, on the defensive side of the ball, they had no idea what they were. They had a lot of ups and downs, but it's going to totally change this year. They're going to go to Dan Quinn. They're going to go back to a lot of that cover 3 type of stuff. People have said that that's a style of coverage that could be outdated in the NFL. I think we're definitely going to find out they're a team that wants to sit back in nickel. They want to play a lot of zone. They want to not have to blitz a whole lot. We'll see if they can get back to some of what they had success with in the past defensively, going back to a similar style of coach that they had in those times before the sort of Mike Nolan experiment.
Who's going to be there for them at number 10?
So at number 10, I think, based on what we were saying before, if we think the offense is going to get healthy, I think if you're going to be a need-based drafter, which I always caution against, you got to look on the defensive side of the ball. And Patrick Surtain is really juicy if he's available there at number 10. If no defensive players have been taken, I think he's the best defender in the draft, and I think they would be wise to take him there. Otherwise, you look at it and you play best player available. The receiver position is kind of stacked for this team right now, so you start to worry about having an embarrassment of riches at certain positions and some holes at some other positions. But that said, you never go wrong by taking the best player. They can sit back and hey, maybe it's even on the offensive line, kind of retooling even more for the future, because they might have their offensive line of the present, but oftentimes we're drafting for the future.
All right, another team that I want to touch on is the Patriots. And the reason was because a few months ago when we talked about them in terms of free agency, there seemed to be some skepticism there. So who are the Patriots right now, and what could be there for them in this draft?
The Patriots right now are becoming, I think, what Bill Belichick would love to become kind of in a vacuum. He's definitely formed his team around Tom Brady for several years there. I think before that, the early part of Tom Brady's career, it was really Tom Brady was a complementary part to what he's built. Now he's getting back to building kind of inside out on offense. So building with the offensive line first, the tight ends, controlling the middle of the field, and then building on the outside in on defense. So starting with the secondary, having a really strong secondary, can take care of itself, and then letting the rest of the defense fill in from there. Obviously, Bill Belichick knows what he's doing. They've signed some of those tight ends to help with the personnel situation because they had nobody at that point last year. The big question mark is, will Cam Newton be their quarterback or will it be somebody else?
All right, and then the last one. The Chiefs made a big trade. They've now retooled their offensive line. They get one of the best guards in free agency. They get one of the best tackles via trade. What's the draft going to be for them?
Well, it's probably not going to be very busy on Thursday because they traded that pick and they've got a phenomenal player. So, I mean, when you look at the Chiefs, I love the investments that they've made in their offensive line. I think maybe it wasn't exactly the path that they intended to go down when they set out on this thing, but ending up with Orlando Brown to come in there and be the blindside protector, that's really exciting. Unfortunately, what comes along with that is that you have to pay him a lot of money. It sounds like he's going to play out the last year of his deal this year, but he's going to be a $20 million a year left tackle next year. So the Chiefs are going to have to be continuing to build throughout their team now that they've invested so much money on the offensive side of the ball. They have a few expensive players on defense. It's going to be really important that even with fewer picks, that they hit on these picks so that they can continue to build the core of their team in a price-controlled fashion.
So I want to recreate the atmosphere of what their room was like when they were making the decisions to go for their top guys. Is it as simple as you walk into a meeting to set up your offseason game plan and Andy Reid says, I want Joe Thuney, I want Brown, and that's that? Or give us a little sense of, is there more to it than that?
Well, I'm sure there's more to it than that. I can't speak to how Andy Reid does things. I had more experience with how it worked, around Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis. And I can say that most of the time, the personnel department is putting this stuff together, is being prepared, is making sure that you have your grades stacked and you have all of your evaluations of the players so that you're well prepared for anybody that's going to become a free agent this year, next year, or could be a cap casualty. You've got all of those players with updated reports on them. But a lot of the times it will happen that you've done your preparation and you've stacked your lists and you've kind of presented the menu, and the coaches might come in and they might say, I want that guy. And there were definitely times that Sean Payton came in and, the Mark Ingram draft pick is a great example of that, where he, traded back up into the first round and said, I don't want to miss out on Emmitt Smith. And so it does happen like that sometimes, but that's probably the exception and not the rule. What I think probably did happen is Andy Reid watched that tape over and over again of the Super Bowl. And when you watch that film, just seeing the ridiculous pressure that Mahomes was under. And I think he was aware of this all season long. I think all season long, this was something that was there that popped up at different times. And it just became more and more exacerbated as they had more and more injuries throughout the playoffs, and finally resulting in that game. But certainly they've accomplished their offseason objective if they were trying to get stronger on the offensive front.
Yeah, you get the feeling Andy Reid said never again, at least not on my watch. All right, Corey March is our senior business development analyst. He's also our resident expert on all things props and DFS. Corey, thanks for joining us. We got 3 props we want to break down. Let's start with this one. Mac Jones. We talked about him with everybody here. Does he go number 3 overall?
First of all, hey guys, good to be here. Good to be back on the show. Yeah, so Mac Jones, 3rd overall. Yeah, that's what I'm here to say I think is going to happen. So that line is going to be fluctuating all over the place as it has been for a while now based on all these rumors back and forth. But I've seen it as high as minus 200, which makes it sound like a pretty sure thing. And like I said, yeah, I think Mac Jones is the guy at number 3. San Francisco traded up to that spot clearly with a guy in mind. And most of the rumors at this point have been around Mac Jones going there. I feel like a lot of the uncertainty around this pick and maybe the perception that some of these other quarterbacks might be more worthy of going that high than Mac Jones, it's kind of giving off the perception that he doesn't belong in that spot, doesn't belong going to 3rd overall in the draft or going that high. But for a team like the 49ers, who are projected to be a good team, projected to be a 10.5 win team, if they have a polished quarterback coming to them, that's really what they need to plug in here. And Mac Jones did exactly that last year with Alabama. Over the past 5 years, since we started charting data, he has the highest positive play rate among all quarterbacks during that span and the lowest bust rate. So the lowest percentage of plays that went horribly wrong were resulted in -1 EPA or worse. So if you're getting a consistent guy who's constantly making plays and avoiding mistakes, that seems like exactly what the 49ers need.
Yeah, the Niners have already addressed their offensive line, which according to the Football Rookie Handbook was their weakest, and according to Total Points was their weakest position last year. But their second weakest position was quarterback. So like Corey mentions, if Mac Jones is able to be what he was for Alabama last year, then sure, you can't draft that guy high enough.
All right, next prop. Jamar Chase is our number 2 receiver. We just debated the merits of him. And the question becomes, where does he go? The over-under is set at 5.5. So does he get past the Bengals or not?
To think that the Bengals are going to draft Jamar Chase here. The line is pretty close to even. It's probably somewhere around -120 is what I've seen it lately. So that's the perception that it's pretty much a toss-up. And that's what the kind of the media seems to be saying here between Jamar Chase and Penei Sewell. And we had the Bengals wide receiver position and offensive line positions ranked pretty poorly last year. You could find that in the SIS Rookie Handbook. I think we had them both below the 25th percentile. So there's a need at both of those positions, but you have 2 tackles on the roster who are capable. They added Riley Reiff, who we graded as kind of a top 10 pass blocking tackle last year, and Jonah Williams on the other side, who hasn't played a ton to this point in his career, but he was the 11th overall pick in 2019. So tackle isn't as big of a need maybe as people might think. And they did lose AJ Green from the receiving core last year. Some might argue that that could be addition by subtraction, but he did lead the team in snaps at the wide receiver position. And there's obviously the factor of the rapport with Jamar Chase, between Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow. So I think that's a factor at play here too. And when you add that on top of the fact that wide receiver may arguably be a bigger need for Cincinnati than tackle, then I think it kind of adds up.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about 2 blue chippers here. Whether you go Penei Sewell or you go Jamar Chase, you're talking about just that's that 7.0 and above grade range. That's what that means. That's a blue chip player. That's a difference maker. I think that's what you'll get with either of those players. Philosophically, I think of it differently than you, Corey, when you talk about kind of analyzing the need and seeing where's the greater need and going in that direction. I you know me, tend to think about things in terms of, let me get the best player available. Let me build quarterback and then up front first. So I would probably, if it was coming down to those two players for me, then I would lean more towards Penei Sewell. I don't think if you're choosing between those two guys, you can go wrong because they're both just, like I said, fantastic blue chip players.
And that's why there's such intrigue in that pick, in that over-under. All right, one more. Trey Lance. So we hear the 49er talk. Wonder if that's a bluff. But if he doesn't go 3, where does he go? There's the Falcons at 4. They could take a quarterback. If he gets past there, he's only going 5 or 6 if there's a trade, right? The over-under 6.5. Does he go in the top 6 or further down?
Yeah, so you touched on kind of the way things are likely going to play out here. And the prop is over 6.5, and you can actually get that at plus money. I think I saw plus 125. And like you said, if things play out with the 49ers taking Mac Jones, which if the line is minus 200, it's starting to trend in that direction, according to Vegas. 4, it's kind of sounding like Kyle Pitts is the most likely outcome there. You mentioned quarterback to the Falcon possibilities, but honestly, I think Matt Ryan isn't the weakness on that team. And I think you can get a few more good years out of him. And then beyond that, it's the Bengals, it's the Dolphins who don't need quarterbacks, aren't playing the draft quarterbacks there. Possibility of a trade. But even if there is a trade, there could be a team who trades up for Justin Fields because they like him better than Trey Lance. So I think that's a possibility here too. And then just the fact that Trey Lance is an inconsistent product who's proven little and has a lot of development left. So I think he's more of a fit a bit further down the board. And when we're talking about over under 6.5 here, yeah, I'm definitely leaning on the over.
So when you talk about the minus 200 for people like me that don't bet as much, how likely is, like, what percentage of the time does a minus 200 end up actually, blowing up in the other direction? Is it a done deal like everybody's making it out to be? Because I still can't straighten it out in my head that you would trade up to draft a player at number 3 that nobody expects to go at number 3 unless you take him there. It still seems surprising to me. And there's a part of me that wonders what exactly these are based on, because I've been inside these rooms and I know I wasn't talking about what we were going to do in terms of the pick if I knew.
I always wonder the same thing. Who's talking to these reporters? Where are these rumors coming from? But it does seem to have some reliability with how things actually play out. So like a minus 200, it all equates to a perceived probability. And with minus 200, it's like 60+%. So that, that kind of speaks for itself in the fact in just the possibilities of outcome here. But I do think that it is usually a pretty good indicator.
It's fascinating. I can't wait to see how that pick shakes out, because whichever way it is, I think it's interesting.
All right, Corey, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I'm really looking forward to the draft. I'll encourage everybody to check out the SIS Data Hub Pro. We just added a ton of great new tools and filters, and it's really incredible stuff if you've never checked it out. And check out our SIS football newsletter. We're going to be dropping a draft edition on Thursday. So check that out. And we're going to talk a little bit about the new additions to the Data Hub Pro there too.
And this wraps up the Off the Charts Football Podcast pre-draft edition. We'll be watching and tweeting on Thursday night, Friday, and Saturday too. You can follow us on Twitter at sportsinfo_SIS or SIS_football. And we'll have reaction in a podcast after the first round of the NFL draft. You can catch that late Thursday night, early Friday morning. You can purchase the Football Rookie Handbook at actasports.com or get it at Amazon, which has the Kindle edition. The book will be useful to you beyond the draft. For Jordan Edwards, Jeff Dean, Nathan Cooper, John Todd, Corey March, Matt Manocherian, our producer Justin Stein, I'm Mark Simon. Enjoy the NFL draft. You've been listening to Off the Charts.